Everyone talks about love, about equality, about partnership, but no one talks about power. No one dares to say that behind the softness of a woman, there might be something else, something ancient, strategic, and untouchable. Friedrich Nietzsche did. He didn't write fairy tales. He didn't believe in romance as salvation. He believed in instincts, in masks, in the quiet war happening underneath every gentle smile. Nietzsche's words about women weren't polite. They weren't modern. They weren't safe. He spoke of seduction as a form of control, of love as a battlefield where men lose themselves without even realizing it. And he said what most thinkers still avoid, that women are not weak. They're terrifyingly effective, not because they dominate, but because they don't need to. In a world built by men, Nietzsche saw women operating beneath the structure, bending it, shaping it, surviving it. He didn't flatter them. He didn't pity them. He respected their force, but he also feared it, because he knew that the most powerful weapon isn't one that shouts. It's one that smiles while it dismantles. This is not a rant. It's not an accusation. It's a reckoning, a confrontation with everything polite society is too afraid to admit. That gender is not just identity, it's strategy. And that woman, in Nietzsche's world, isn't just a lover, or a mother, or a muse. She's the test. She's the temptation. She's the mirror that reveals whether a man is ruled by strength or by illusion. So if you're looking for comfort, leave now. But if you're ready to see through the veil, keep watching. Because the truth about women, the one no one dares to say, was already written. And Nietzsche didn't whisper it. He carved it in fire. Nietzsche never claimed to understand women. In fact, he doubted anyone did. But what disturbed him wasn't their mystery. It was the way men refused to question it. He saw early on that women were treated as symbols of purity, as delicate beings made for affection and poetry, and he didn't buy it. He believed those illusions weren't just wrong, they were dangerous. Because the moment you treat someone as innocent, you surrender power without even realizing it. His early life shaped this suspicion. Raised by women after the death of his father, Nietzsche saw up close the complexities that the world refused to admit. He watched how charm could be used as influence, how softness could hide steel, and how those who seemed powerless often pulled the strings behind the curtain. This didn't make him hateful. It made him alert. He realized that power doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from the ability to make others feel safe while slowly reshaping their choices. Nietzsche saw in women not simplicity, but design. Not manipulation out of cruelty, but instinct born from survival. And that instinct, sharpened over generations, had become something men could no longer recognize without feeling threatened. The smile, the touch, the gaze, it wasn't just affection. It was language, one that men had never learned to read. He knew the world had wrapped women in a soft narrative, one that kept them beyond criticism. But he didn't want to flatter anyone. He wanted to unmask. And what he saw behind the smile wasn't evil. It was strategy, cold, elegant, and effective. To Nietzsche, the most brutal truth wasn't that women deceived. It was that men wanted to be deceived and built entire philosophies to protect the illusion. Nietzsche believed that nature was not moral. It was merciless. It didn't care about fairness, justice, or love. It cared only about survival and dominance. And in that brutal economy, women were not victims. They were nature's most refined creation, not to fight through force, but to conquer through form, not to crush, but to outlast. He saw the female not as fragile, but as efficient, a force that mastered influence rather than violence. Where man used muscle, woman used mind. Where man stormed the gates, she walked through them with a glance. This wasn't weakness. It was power in its most undetectable form. Nietzsche believed that women had learned, better than men, how to operate in a world where raw strength fades. Their weapon wasn't the sword. It was the ability to make the sword irrelevant. Their genius wasn't in confrontation, but in redirection, in evasion, in the art of being underestimated until the outcome had already been decided. And what made this power so unstoppable was that it didn't announce itself. It didn't brag. It didn't need to. It simply worked. Quietly, constantly, beneath the radar of a man too distracted by ego to see what was really happening. This is why Nietzsche feared the seductive, because it doesn't ask, it arranges. It doesn't take, it invites. And by the time a man realizes what he's given, it's already gone. His time, his focus, his will. He didn't say this to insult women. He said it to expose nature's game, to reveal the real battlefield, the one dressed in perfume and politeness. Woman, in Nietzsche's eyes, wasn't the weaker sex. She was nature's silent strategist. And man, for all his armor and ambition, rarely saw it coming until he was already on his knees. Nietzsche didn't believe in love as liberation. He believed in love as leverage. For him, the relationship between man and woman was never neutral. It was a dance, but not of equals. It was a game of tension, of approach and retreat, of invisible moves made in silence. And in that dance, he believed it was women who led. He saw seduction not as romance, but as strategy, an ancient, refined art of shaping desire into obedience. The moment a man begins to long, he begins to bend. And the one who controls the longing controls the game. Women, he believed, rarely needed to argue. They only needed to create the conditions where a man would argue with himself. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about instinct. Nietzsche believed women understood something men often forgot, that control doesn't always come from dominance. Sometimes it comes from withdrawal, from absence, from the ability to inspire pursuit without ever having to chase. And that's where he saw their terrifying strength, not in aggression, but in restraint. To Nietzsche, a woman's power was not in what she demanded, but in what she denied. Her ability to grant or withhold affection, attention, approval, that was the real weapon. The man, convinced he was winning her, was actually being shaped by her. He called it love. She called it alignment. The tragedy, Nietzsche believed, wasn't that men were manipulated. It was that they wanted to be. They wanted to fall, to chase, to surrender to the myth of romance while calling it truth. And in doing so, they handed over the reins not just to her, but to the instincts within themselves they refused to understand. In this dance, the woman does not shout. She doesn't need to. She leads in silence and watches as he follows, smiling, into the fire. When Nietzsche saw the rising calls for women's liberation in his time, he didn't celebrate. He scoffed, not because he believed in female inferiority, but because he believed the entire idea of equality was a fantasy designed to erase the power of difference. He didn't see the push for emancipation as strength. He saw it as confusion. He believed women weren't becoming more powerful. They were abandoning the very force that made them formidable. To Nietzsche, femininity wasn't something to be shed. It was something primal, something aligned with nature's will. And when women reached for male roles, male duties, male values, they weren't rising. They were being reshaped by the very structures that once feared them. The woman who tried to become a man, in his view, wasn't liberating herself. She was losing herself. He believed that modern society, obsessed with sameness, was waging war on authenticity. It wanted everyone to be equal, not in opportunity, but in identity, in temperament, in instincts. And that, to him, was a slow cultural suicide. Because true power, Nietzsche argued, comes from embracing what you are, not mimicking what you're not. In his eyes, the woman of the future wasn't stronger. She was duller, less intuitive, less connected to the deep, instinctual wisdom that once made her untouchable. She was taught to be offended by what once gave her power, to see nature not as an ally, but as a chain. And so she broke it, only to replace it with a new one, forged in imitation and insecurity. Nietzsche didn't oppose feminine strength. He opposed its distortion. He believed that by trying to compete with men on their terms, women were not becoming free. They were becoming invisible. And the tragedy, he believed, was that no one noticed, because everyone was too busy clapping. Nietzsche believed that women moved through the world with a clarity men had long forgotten. Not because they were more rational. He thought quite the opposite. He believed women were closer to instinct, to life's raw current, unfiltered by the abstractions that cloud the male mind. While men built castles of logic and reason, women lived inside the storm, fluid, adaptable, and unshaken. He saw men as idealists, addicted to systems, to theories, to invented meanings that kept them distracted from reality. They wrote books about love while women mastered it in silence. They invented philosophies to control desire while women moved through desire like it was home. And for all their noise, men were often the ones who couldn't see what was right in front of them. In Nietzsche's view, the woman wasn't caught in illusion. She was the reality men refused to face. She didn't need metaphysics or morality to justify her choices. She acted. She adjusted. She survived. He admired that, even as he feared it, because her strength wasn't obvious. It wasn't celebrated. It was internal, silent, unstoppable. And so, while men drifted into fantasies of eternal love, noble suffering, and moral duty, women did something far more dangerous. They stayed close to the ground. They read the room. They shaped outcomes. They didn't get lost in questions of meaning. They made themselves the answer. To Nietzsche, this wasn't a flaw. It was terrifying brilliance. Because in a world built on illusion, instinct becomes the most subversive force of all. And woman, for all her softness, carried that force with devastating precision. She didn't need to break the system. She just had to move through it, watching as men, trapped in their own illusions, called her mysterious, while she quietly rewrote the rules they thought they understood. In Nietzsche's world, nothing great is given. It is earned through struggle, confrontation, and the refusal to kneel. And at the center of that confrontation stands the feminine, not as a reward, but as a trial. Not an enemy, but a mirror. She is the test every man must face if he dares to rise beyond comfort and conformity, and most fail. The woman, in Nietzsche's vision, is not there to complete a man. She's there to reveal him, to expose his fault lines, to tempt his surrender, to show him whether he belongs among the herd or has the fire to become something more. She doesn't challenge him with threats. She challenges him with seduction, with the power to make him forget his path, his strength, his will. And this is what separates the Übermensch, the man who transcends, from the one who falls. The Übermensch doesn't reject the feminine. He engages her, but he does not collapse into her. He doesn't beg for validation. He doesn't trade freedom for affection. He stands, fully, without apology, without needing to be chosen. Nietzsche didn't see women as evil. He saw them as nature's final guardian, the last veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary. She is the curve in the road that asks, will you detour into comfort or stay the course into fire? Most men romanticize her, worship her. They call it love, but it's really a disguised retreat, a surrender to the softness that shields them from their own potential. But the man who passes the test doesn't hate her for it. He thanks her because she didn't block his path. She revealed it. And in walking past the illusion, he didn't reject the feminine. He transformed through it. That is the trial. That is the crucible. And most never even see it coming. Society talks endlessly about equality, romance, and respect, but it rarely dares to speak honestly about power, about strategy, about what actually happens between men and women beneath the words, beneath the scripts, beneath the carefully polished narratives we've built to make ourselves feel civil. Nietzsche tore through those scripts like paper, and what he revealed wasn't hatred, it was discomfort, the kind that lingers when someone says what you secretly suspect might be true. He didn't write to condemn women. He wrote to strip away the lies men tell themselves about women. The lie that love is unconditional. The lie that desire is noble. The lie that seduction is innocent. Nietzsche looked at the dance between the sexes and saw something far more primal, a contest of instincts, illusions, and unspoken negotiations. And the woman, he believed, often held the upper hand, not by force, but by finesse, not with commands, but with curves. The brutal truth? Most men don't want to lead. They want to be chosen. They don't want to master themselves. They want to be saved from themselves. And woman becomes the fantasy through which that escape is sold. She becomes the answer to every question a man is too afraid to ask. But Nietzsche warned, no one saves you, not even her. If you are not already whole, she will not complete you. If you are weak, she will expose it. If you seek your meaning in her, you will lose it. And the world, dressed in comfort and illusion, will tell you this is love. But Nietzsche offered no comfort, only fire. Because behind the romance, behind the equality, behind the smile, there is power. And the question is not whether she holds it. The question is whether you ever see it before it's too late.